Hello and welcome to a video brought to you by AIA Contract Documents. In this video, we're going to be talking about 3 new application for payment forms that are being published by the AIA Contract Documents program in June of 2021. Those forms are the G702 CW-2021, the G702 GMP-2021, and the G703 CW-2021. And each of these new 3 forms have a very special place in the AIA's library of documents because they were created to solve a few problems that exist on projects where the contractor or construction manager are paid on a cost of the work plus a fee basis. As always, nothing that we say in these videos should be construed as legal advice. If you have questions about a specific project or how to fill out your individual forms for payment applications, please contact an attorney who's licensed in your state. My name is Mike Koger. I'm an attorney who's been working with the AIA Contract Documents program for almost 8 years now. Joining me in this video are Roger Atanasio, Tom Heisel, and Robin Banks, all 3 of whom worked on developing these 3 new forms. Roger is an architect and principal with the firm LS3P. He's based out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and was the chair of the task group that created these forms. Tom is also an architect, and like Roger, he's been with a longstanding member of the AIA Contract Documents Committee. He is a principal at the architecture firm Alliance in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And last but not least, Robin Banks is an attorney hailing from Baltimore, Maryland. Robin's a principal in the law firm of Goldberg and Banks and is outside counsel to the AIA Contract Documents program. So in this video, we're going to be talking about these 3 new applications for payment forms and learn from the experts who created them just what the differences are about these forms when compared to some of our other AIA payment application forms, when they should be used and how to use them. So thank you, Roger, Tom, and Robin. I will start off with a big question that I know anybody who's clicked on this video is going to want to know the answer to. Roger, I'm going to direct it to you first. When folks see these new forms, they're going to wonder, are they going to be replacing the 1992 G702 and G703 forms that have been around for almost 30 years now?
Well, the simple answer is no. They're not going to replace the forms. These forms were created for the special purpose to be used with a cost of the work project, and the original forms have been used at all different types of payment processes for years and years, and you can still use them. These are specifically designed for use with cost of the work with a GMP or cost of the work without a GMP.
Excellent. I think a lot of folks are going to want to know that you can still continue to use those 1992 forms for almost any application for payment scenario in a traditional design bid build scenario. Including, you can still use them for cost of the work projects. We've just created these new forms because we think they work a little bit better for cost of the work projects. Roger, can you, just a follow-up question, can you tell us, what's the issue that AIA was trying to solve by creating these new cost of the work application for payment forms?
When you have a cost of the work payment method, the contractor is allowed to reallocate or shift funds from one line item on a schedule of values to another as the actual cost of the work is determined. When you first start with a original schedule of values, it's an estimate as best you can determine from the trying to do your original cost estimate, allocate the funds for the entire project. Well, as the work actually goes in progress and you determine the actual cost of the work, one item may cost more, one item may cost less, and the contractor may want to shift, or the construction manager may want to shift those funds around. Well, from pay app to pay app, it could be difficult for the architect to keep track of where these funds are reallocated or shifted from one line item to another. So we have tried to create a form that identifies when a line item or when a cost changes and from where it changed and to where it changed. So that's the real crux of the matter, is trying to not educate, but let owners and architects understand where contractors have cost incurred and where they moved funds around during the progress of the work.
Gotcha. And I assume this is also would be helpful for contractors to be able to kind of keep track of their math with regard to money that's been moving around from one line item to the next. Is that fair?
That's one method of doing it. Contractors are supposed to develop measures for monitoring costs, and those can be pretty extensive with invoices and receipts and whatnot that an architect or an owner may not look at each month. But as the architect is required to certify the pay applications, the architect needs to know where dollars and what percentage of items are complete so that we don't pay in advance or overpay on a line item, but also allow the contractor to move funds around because with a guaranteed maximum price, you are allowed to go up to that price. So not every line item is a guaranteed price. So just to educate or let the architect and owner understand where the funds are being allocated is the purpose of these new documents.
Excellent. And Tom, I'm going to bring you into the conversation here. Folks who are just hearing me list out the new documents that we have, they'll probably notice that there's two different G702 forms, new ones, that are being published in 2021, but only one G703. Can you explain why it is that we've got two of one and only one of the other, and how they all work together?
Not to mention the G702, 1992. The forms are designed to, as Roger said very clearly, to bring together, to allow the contractor to be able to clearly identify the line items as they move around. In each of those situations, whether it's with the G702 GMP or the G702 CW, basically the G703 that works with both of those serves exactly the same function. The main difference in all this, and as we go and show the visual documents later on, is that we worked hard to be clear on what was the original cost and to work through what the changes are from previous applications. So it actually, as Roger described it, you can track it. And that's the main thing that these do. So to answer your question, Mike, of the end of the day, the extension form, the continuation form is the same because basically it is. We're tracking in the same way for both of those. The cover sheet has those differences, which we'll be talking about.
Excellent. Yeah, and the differences in those two G702, one is for a cost of the work with a GMP feature, and the other is just a plain cost of the work without a GMP feature. Is that right?
And the second one, the one for the cost of the work, you'll notice a big difference in there is that one, it doesn't refer to a GMP because there isn't one. And then there is no bottom line for work remaining. The cost of the work in that situation is one that basically has no cap and will allow, so it doesn't try to quantify that within the form.
This will all make a lot more sense when we start to pull up each document individually. But it's good to just kind of understand generally what we were trying to do. Which actually leads me to the next question, which is really for anyone. Now, all three of you worked on these documents for quite a while in task groups, had regular meetings. I know that you were also not just responding to a theoretical need. You had also heard from some folks in the industry who were asking for this. Can you talk about what you were hearing from folks in the industry as far as what they had been doing and as kind of a workaround, and then what their needs were?
Well, I'll speak from personal experience. Construction management projects, when pay apps are submitted and costs do shift around, an architect may have to go look at the previous month's pay application to try and figure out where somebody reallocated or shifted some money from and to. And in some cases, pay apps can be 30 pages long. You can have 30 continuation pages because of the original schedule of values. And so trying to find where numbers were shifted was what I felt like was an undue burden on the architect, exhaustive kind of research to figure out where monies went. So this was a means of trying to expedite the pay application process so that one could easily see when a contractor, as they are allowed to do, moved money from one line item to another in the case of a GMP without exceeding the guaranteed maximum price, or with when it's a cost of the work with no guaranteed maximum price, where money shifted around in the control estimate that was originally submitted without having to go through that entire estimate month after month after month. So it was really trying to expedite the understanding of where dollars shifted from and to, and the approval process that needed to be done in a timely manner, because architects have only so many days to review and certify an application for payment.
One other thing, Mike, is that we had a couple of former documents committee members who've been very involved in some work that our group had done leading up to the update to the cost of the work payment applications. And it was looking at the difference between cost of the work projects and stipulated sum. And a couple of these former documents committee members represent owners. And they expressed real concern that they have on a project by project basis when they can't follow where the money is going from payment app to payment app, as Roger just expressed. So this came in response to people, members of the committee who represent owners, who were saying, we need help understanding where the contractor or the construction manager is moving money on a monthly basis so we can better track where our money is being spent.
And Mike, adding to that is also the really important piece that the architect is certifying this. And if the architect can't go and verify it easily, and things have changed around percentage-wise, it makes it our job very difficult. And the fact that we're actually signing off on this as a certification, seems to be really important for us to be able to go line by line and understand what's changed, as Roger described.
We were not trying to limit what the contractor can or cannot do. We were trying to increase the understanding of, as Robin said, owners, and Tom said, architects' understanding, so that the architect doesn't over-certify or approve something that shouldn't be approved.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you all had mentioned, the fact that we had been hearing from architects, particularly architects that had done these, had worked on cost plus projects that were fairly large, and they had created their own workarounds. I mean, a lot of times what folks had done was developed their own spreadsheets that looked like our G703 with extra columns, and we had been hearing for years that we needed. We're almost forcing people into doing a workaround. It was almost like the path that is a little bit worn down, that like the planners should know to just go ahead and make that an actual path, because people want to go along that path of travel anyway. Robin, I want to ask you a couple of legal questions, or at least one big legal question, before we actually start to look at these forms and kind of go a little bit closer through them. And that is, can you summarize a little bit about like some of the legal ramifications for changing the schedule of values? I know there's a procedure in the A201 and some of our other documents about how that happens. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure, Mike. So the process is set forth in A201 and Article 9 about the schedule of values. And the schedule of values can be changed. It's not something that is necessarily anticipated to be the same throughout the project, but it really depends on how the contractor or CM is going to be paid. On a stipulated sum contract, the contractor is going to be obligated to allocate the entire contract sum among various portions of the work. And then he or she is going to take this schedule of values and is going to submit it to the architect to review and to approve before the first application for payment. After the first application for payment, it's going to be used by the architect as a means for reviewing all of the subsequent applications for payment. Any changes to that document are going to have to go through the architect and be approved before the new schedule of values can be updated to reflect that. On a stipulated sum contract, though, the contract documents are largely complete. There aren't going to be a lot of changes that happen to it. So when the contractor comes in with its price, it knows most of its numbers. It knows what various portions of the work are going to cost, and there's not expected to be a whole lot of change there. So as a practical matter, you're not going to need the architect to review an updated schedule of values and approve it. It's largely going to be the same. Now, on a cost of the work project, the mechanics of how you go about getting the schedule of values initially approved and changes to it approved are the same, but the process is pretty different. When you've got a cost of the work project with the guaranteed maximum price, and this is in the cost of the work agreement forms, there's a statement that the cost of the work is going to be allocated, the entire GMP is going to be allocated among basically into three categories. One is the estimated value of the various portions of the work. The second is what we call a little c contingency. And these are for costs that are included in the GMP that are reimbursable under the agreement, but are not otherwise included in one of the line items for the trades. And three is a contractor's or construction manager's fee. And the contractor or CM is going to submit this schedule of values to the architect. Again, they're going to approve it and need to use it as a basis for reviewing future applications. But where the cost of a work project really differs from stipulated sum is that here, the contract documents are largely not complete. They anticipate that there are going to be revisions and whatnot. And so the contractor or CM is typically not in a good position to provide all of their costs for doing the project. Drawings could be as little as 20 or 30% complete, and they're expected to give a cost. So what happens is during the buyout of the project, as Roger explained a couple minutes ago, there's some items may wind up being cheaper, and some items may wind up being more expensive. And ultimately, it's going to result in a constant reshuffling of monies in and out of the various line items to ultimately true up to stay ultimately below the GMP. So, for example, if the concrete line item is cheaper, then you're going to be able to return some money to that little c contingency. If the mechanical line item winds up to be more expensive, you're going to take money from the contingency and put it up there. Now, technically, a contractor or CM who continues to bill against that original schedule of values over the course of the project and never reflects it to adjust to the actual values may be in breach of their contract and may ultimately result, as both Tom and Roger said, in the architect either improperly being able to certify the percentage complete and the owner overpaying, which no owner wants to do, and which was part of the concern from the owner reps on the committee. They said that they were constantly overpaying contractors if they weren't able to follow the money. So they really wanted to ensure that process was in place. And in a similar vein, a contractor or a CM who adjusts the schedule of values, but who doesn't get the architect's approval, arguably may also technically be in breach of their contract. Now, that was for contracts where you've got a GMP on pure cost of the work, or contracts without a GMP. It's a little different because there is no schedule of values per se. There's a control estimate, which is a tracking number, I think Roger mentioned. And with the control estimate, the contractor or CM is obligated to update that control estimate on a monthly basis as estimated costs for the various portions of the work become actual costs. So again, there's that legal responsibility obligation on the contractor or CM to update that on a monthly basis, and there may be some legal obligations or failure to do that.
Thank you, Robin. That's really good background, because I think as we start to go through these documents, in a little more finer detail here, it's good to know that, with a STIP sum project, your schedule of values is pretty relatively fixed. But when it comes to cost of the work and GMP type of projects, it's more of a, it's a little more guesswork going into it, and things are just going to have to move around, and that's perfectly acceptable as long as everyone understands, how things are moving. So with that, let's go ahead and pull up. I'd like to start, I think a logical place to start would be with the G703. Is everyone okay with taking a look through that one first and talking about it? Okay. So taking a look at the G703 CW, this is the only new G703 document we have. It does work with, like we mentioned, it does work with both of the new G702 2021 documents. You'll notice that in the original 1992 version of the G703, it would just have scheduled value there under column C. Maybe, Roger, can I ask you to just kind of go through obviously there's 3 new columns here for a total of 4 columns under C. Can you just talk through those and how it's supposed to work, how you're supposed to fill them out?
The original, C1, the original, is the schedule of values that the contractor places in there when he creates the first schedule of values he does that he sends to the architect for approval. As the work progresses, there may be a change in 1 month. So you can, for that change, it would occur in C3, that the change for that period. and then it would be the current value, whether it went up or whether it went down, and you would have a current value. This is the second pay application you would submit. And then the rest of it works the same. From the previous pay application, what the number was, and then the amount of money they're asking for this period, and the other columns work the same as the original G703 worked. As you progress, the numbers might change more than one time, and so we tried to allocate. If it changed one month, went up, then the next month it went down. We allowed for a change from the previous application, what occurred this period, and then the current value of that line item. So C1 should never change once after the first pay application. C2, C3, and C4 could change from month to month to month. And so we wanted to be able for the owner and the architect to understand where the contractor was what we called reallocating or shifting funds from one line item to another. It might go to another line item. It might go to the small c contingency item that Robin spoke about. But this way you could look at each line item from pay app to pay app and understand where, if any, money was taken from or added to, and then the rest of the pay app or the rest of the columns worked as every other, or as the original G703. So that was the idea behind our discussion and our logic when we created this. The ability to understand from month to month to month where money, if any, shifted from one line item to another.
And it's, that all seems very straightforward. What's kind of nice about it, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you go all the way to the bottom, if you're whatever pay application you're on, if you go all the way to the bottom of C1 and look at the grand total and you compare it to C4, you'll actually get to see total. As the owner and architect, you can see total how much the total scheduled value has changed. So it actually really is, maybe I had $1 million project. Well, now I can see I'm 200,000 over because column 4 says 1.2 million. Am I right on that?
That could happen. That's correct. That could be less if the cost of the work is actually less. Not likely, but possible.
That also depends on how you're allocating contingency, and if contingency is a separate line item within here, and then how that moves up and down, because with a GMP price, the bottom line shouldn't change in that scenario.
Okay.
See, the contingency item is the contingency line item is a line item that may or may not get used, right? I mean, it's there for the contractor's use, but the cost of the work is the cost of the work. It's the actual cost of the work. And at the end of the day, if the owner so desires, he can run an audit on the cost of the work and see what it actually is. So this was to try and educate architects without looking at, as Robin talked about, the controlled estimate when there is no guaranteed maximum price, and against the original guaranteed max price that was submitted for the architect or the owner to approve before they started construction. So these line items or these columns were there to just educate the architect and make it easier for the architect to understand what is being requested and what percentage is complete compared to what he observes in the field or what she observes in the field, and also to allow the owner to understand the estimated cost, the original estimated cost, and then the actual cost of each scope of work or a line item on the application for payment.
Well, Mike, and if I can just clarify one thing with regard to what we call the little c contingency. The little c contingency is intended to be for, I think, as I said before, costs that are allowable under the agreement and defined as costs to be reimbursed. It includes costs during the correction period that the CM or the contractor may incur that aren't the result of the contractor's negligence or the result of breach of their failure to perform their obligations in accordance with the contract, which were sometimes called bent nails. The little c contingency is not intended under the AIA documents to be a slush fund for the contractor or CM to be able to use for either coordination errors or excessive overruns and that type of thing. It is not intended for that purpose. It's only to be used for the allowable costs of the work.
Excellent. Good to point out. So I'm going to turn. I think we should turn to the next document. And the next document I think that makes sense is G702 GMP. That's probably the most used form, because let's face it, cost of the work projects tend to be GMP more often than not, or GMP in nature rather than just an open-ended cost of the work. Tom, could I ask you to kind of walk us through, there's just a few subtle changes between this form and the 1992 version, which you still could use. We're not retiring it. Could you just kind of walk us through what those changes are and why we made those changes?
So since the G703 is now has more detail in it and allows for these changes to happen, we had to pull those back into the G702, and some of the subtle changes is just language, where we're putting in, instead of contract sum, we're using guaranteed maximum price. We're looking at other ways to, on the bottom on line 9, what is the guaranteed maximum price balance as opposed to balance to finish. Some of it was just subtle things like that. The form is tracking, the change order changes as well, which may or may not, or would eventually have been reflected in the G703. It just is, we just married the two together. So marrying G703 with this new G702 GMP. Are there other things, Roger, within that we missed? What are,
No, there were 3 line items that actually got changed, and you
Oh.
covered them all. Line item 1 used to say original contract sum. It now says guaranteed maximum price. Line item 3 used to say contract sum. It now says guaranteed maximum price to date. And line item 9 went from balance to finish to guaranteed maximum price balance. Again, so that we could allow the owner to understand how much is left on the guaranteed maximum price that the owner approved when he signed the guaranteed maximum price amendment when he was using an A133 contract. Those are the 3 main changes in this G702 GMP.
And yeah, and that one to my mind is the easiest one to understand. You're really just changing contract sum to GMP. The one that's a little more tricky, that has it, we're bound to get some questions on when we actually start to put this, see these things completed, is the G702 CW for cost of the work without GMP feature projects. And there's definitely more noticeable things. For example, the change order summary is gone from that. Definitely some other kinds of changes here. Does anyone want to volunteer to take this one and kind of walk us through some of those changes?
Okay. So we made some of the interesting changes here, as Mike said, are based on the nature of a pure cost of the work, or cost of the work without a guaranteed maximum price as opposed to with. So fundamentally, when you have a cost of the work project without a guaranteed maximum price, you do not need a change order to adjust the contract sum. The contract sum is going to go up or down, usually up, based upon the actual cost of constructing the project, and there's no cap. The owner is going to pay whatever it is, and the control estimate is a way for the owner to track how much it's paying, but the price is what it is. The only thing that you need a change order for on a project, which is, again, cost of the work without a guaranteed maximum price, is to either change the scope of work that the contractor is performing or to change the contract time. So we have removed the references in this payment application, the G702 CW, to the change orders, because you don't need, again, a change order to adjust the contract time. Similarly, we also removed the item 9, balance to finish, because, again, the owner is going to pay what it pays, and they don't need to know what where their risk stops and where the contractor's risk begins, because, again, they're responsible for all of the money that it costs to build the project. We also replaced the term contract sum with control estimate, because, again, that's the tracking information that's used. The control estimate is what's used to track the actual costs on a monthly basis and what's submitted to the owner for review.
That's a great summary, Robin. I should have known to turn to our attorney first when talking about this one. It's yeah, and this one in my mind is the one where when you really use the old 1992 version of G702, where you have to kind of make a mental leap between that document, which is really best used for a STIP-SOM project, and a cost of the work methodology. Just some of the phraseology doesn't really transfer over, which is why we have this form now, which all the phrasing and the terminology, cost estimate, or excuse me, control estimate, makes a lot more sense. So a couple of other kind of high-level questions that I should make sure we cover. One that we haven't talked about yet, but we've danced around a little bit: AIA documents that can be that you should be thinking about these forms when you're using them. So I probably phrased that a little bit awkwardly, but in my mind, they are the A133 and the A134, both construction manager as constructor documents, the A102 and A103, and then also I believe the A104 has a checkbox where you can actually pick a cost of the work pricing methodology as well. So these forms could be used with the A104 as well. Have I left anything out there?
Did you mention the A121?
I did not. Yeah, that's a good catch. Yes, the A121. That's the master agreement. And we've already kind of covered this a little bit, but I might as well ask the question more specifically to Roger and Tom. You're both practicing architects. You both work on projects that are cost of the work basis on a pretty regularly. Why should architects and owners care about these new forms? I mean, does it matter to them? And what should they, and particularly owners, why should they care about these forms?
It's a good question, and it's kind of a basic question why we looked and wanted to revise these in the first place. I think it's two things in my mind. One is clarity. I think we've talked a few times about how this does clarify how things move around, but I think tied to clarity is risk. And I think that we, for both representing the owner, we need to ensure that we are being accurate and we're certifying it. And then the risk, if something does go south, that we were accurate and could reliably use the application to note exactly where we were for what is complete in the project. So in my mind, it's those two things. Roger, other things you want to add to clarity and risk?
No, that's a fair statement. An architect each month is certifying that the percentage is complete of the work that they observe versus what's being requested by the contractor. We want to make sure that we're paying the contractor for work that they are entitled to, but you do not want to overpay. If something was to go south and the owner needed to hire somebody else to finish some work, we wanted to make sure that you paid the contractor for what they had completed, but not overpaid the contractor. So understanding each month accurately, or understanding exactly where the money is or has been put in place and approved, is one of the architect's responsibilities. And the need to understand that without taking an exhaustive amount of time to go through the pay application process. If anybody who's ever had a 30 or 40 page pay application and had to go through that every month, to go line item by line item by line item to understand where dollars have shifted around, can be a exhaustive process. And again, the owner doesn't want to get in a situation where they've discovered there's been an overpayment, and trying to go back and trying to figure out where that overpayment occurred is a difficult process to go through. So these documents, these forms were created to try and make it clear to where the money has gone, because the contractor can, in the case of this cost of the work, take money from this location and put it to another location. That's allowable, but we just want to make it clear for everybody what's going on at the time it happens. So that's the reason for these pay applications.
And Mike, adding a little bit to that too, is that the architect or the staff who are in the field verifying this are not doing a quantity takeoff per se. It's still an intuitive sense. So if you're looking at a percentage complete, you're having to rely on, as Roger said, bringing in what the contractor's providing to us, but you're also needing to interpret it. And so the more tools we have as an architect at our disposal to be as accurate as we can, since there's always money involved on our owner's money, It's really important. So this tool will help that.
In my mind, it also speeds up the process. Sorry, Mike. It speeds up the pay application process. If money does move around, instead of having to go back and forth 2 or 3 times with the draft copies of the application for payment till we can get one agreed upon, this allows the contractor to explain to the architect and the owner what they're doing, and then the architect and the owner can understand and then expedite the approval process, because nobody likes for a pay application to be delayed for any reason.
Roger, your comments took me back a few years, because I'm reminded of one of the last clients I represented before working with the AIA. It was an owner who wanted to audit and understand, the finances on a project that was a cost of the work GMP project. And of course, we hired, in addition to hiring attorneys and experts, also hired an accounting firm as well. An absolute mess to untangle, because it was a fairly large project. They had moved money around really without explaining how in their pay application. So imagine going back, of course, over course of 2 years worth of pay apps, money moving all over the place, and trying to figure out where it went and how it was logically aligned, and an absolute mess. So if you want to save on if you're an owner and you want to save on legal fees and auditors' fees, and when you're trying to make a claim in the future, or to figure out if you've overpaid for a project, these kind of forms will help. If we had these forms, we would have understood immediately where money moved. I'm sure, Robin, you've probably ran into situations like that as well. So with that, I think we've covered everything in pretty good detail. Thank you all, Roger, Tom, Robin. Really appreciate the time.